When we talk about focus, especially for women, we often underestimate how powerful it is to turn that focus inward. Most of the time, life teaches you to pour your attention into everything around you, into the people you love, the tasks you must complete, the responsibilities that demand your time, and the expectations that society subtly places upon your shoulders. But very rarely does life remind you to pause and look within. And that is where everything truly begins to shift, because the moment a woman redirects her energy inward, the moment she chooses herself as the center of her own attention, a different kind of strength starts to awaken. It's a quiet strength, a grounded strength, one that doesn't need noise to be felt. It simply exists. And in its existence, it begins to reshape everything. See, when you focus outward all the time, you end up reacting to life instead of leading it. You become shaped by the demands of others, pulled into their emotions, their chaos, their opinions. And it's not because you are weak, it's because your nature is deeply intuitive, deeply giving. But giving without boundaries eventually drains you. It makes you forget the sound of your own internal voice. It makes you forget what you need, what you want, and who you are beneath all the roles you play. When a woman starts to focus on herself again, she is not becoming selfish, she is becoming centered. She is reclaiming the authority of her own mind, her own emotions, her own direction. And once a woman becomes centered, she becomes unshakable. Focusing on yourself doesn't mean you isolate yourself from the world. It means you learn to differentiate between what truly matters and what doesn't deserve space within your energy. It means you start asking yourself more honest questions. Am I living in alignment with my values? Am I showing up for myself the way I show up for others? Am I giving my energy to situations that nurture me or ones that drain me? These questions are powerful not because the answers are always easy, but because they force you to confront parts of your life you've been ignoring. And the more honest you become with yourself, the clearer everything becomes around you. Clarity is what transforms a woman from being overwhelmed to being intentional. When you begin focusing inward, your standards naturally rise, not because you suddenly expect more from people, but because you begin expecting more from yourself. You begin recognizing the patterns in your own behavior that may have contributed to situations you thought were beyond your control. You start to see how much peace you can create simply by choosing not to entertain what drains your spirit. You start to notice the difference between what you want and what you've been told to want. This internal shift brings an external transformation, and that's why people often say that when a woman truly focuses on herself, her entire life begins to recalibrate. And here's something very important. Focus is energy. Whatever you focus on expands. When your focus is scattered across problems, distractions, noise, and expectations, those things expand. When your focus returns to yourself, your growth, your mind, your habits, your inner peace, that also expands. You cannot expect your life to rise if your energy is constantly leaking into places that don't elevate you. But the moment you choose to invest your energy into understanding yourself, protecting your peace, strengthening your mind, and nurturing your purpose, you create momentum. And that momentum pulls everything else in your life into alignment. A woman who focuses on herself becomes more aware of her emotional landscape. She understands her triggers, her boundaries, her strengths, her weaknesses. She becomes the observer of her own mind instead of being consumed by its stories. That self-awareness becomes her compass. It guides her choices. It helps her decide where she belongs and where she no longer needs to be. It teaches her how to stop forcing situations and start allowing life to unfold with more ease. And because she no longer reacts impulsively, she becomes more calm, more grounded, more intentional. People feel this difference in her. They notice her silence, her centeredness, her presence, and without her saying a word, they begin treating her differently. And this is the part that often surprises people. The world responds to the energy you carry, not the words you speak. When a woman focuses inward, she doesn't have to announce it. She doesn't have to explain her boundaries, justify her choices, or prove her worth. Her energy communicates all of it. Her silence becomes a statement. Her confidence becomes quieter yet stronger. Her priorities shift, and so does the reality around her. Opportunities come more naturally. Relationships become clearer. peace becomes easier to maintain. Because when you change internally, the external world has no choice but to rearrange itself around your newfound clarity. That is why the journey inward isn't just personal, it is transformational. Not loud, not dramatic, but deeply powerful. The kind of power that grows from stillness, from intention, from choosing yourself without apology. And when you choose yourself with consistency, life begins to choose you back in ways you never imagined. This is where everything begins to fall in your favor. There is a certain kind of strength that doesn't come from speaking, explaining, or defending. It comes from observing. It comes from listening without reacting, watching without absorbing, and understanding without responding immediately. And this is where silence becomes one of the most powerful tools a woman can ever learn to master. Silence is not an absence of voice, it is the presence of control. It is the choice to respond only when it serves your peace, your clarity, and your purpose. And when you reach that level of inner mastery, everything about the way you move through the world begins to shift. Most people misunderstand silence. They think it means you have nothing to say or that someone else has overpowered you. But silence is not a lack of power. Silence is the refining of power. When you choose to remain silent, you're not losing anything. You're gaining space. Space to feel, to see, to think, to breathe. Instead of reacting to every word, every situation, every emotional pull, you give yourself the time to understand what is actually happening. In silence, you gain perspective. You see people for who they truly are rather than who they pretend to be. You notice patterns in the way someone speaks, behaves, shifts their energy. You pick up on things that others overlook, and this awareness becomes a form of wisdom. When a woman stops talking and starts observing, she begins to see the truth hidden beneath the surface. She sees intentions behind actions, meaning behind words, and authenticity behind appearances. She stops getting caught up in noise because she's no longer competing with it. Noise cannot shake someone who has learned how to root herself in silence. And that is what makes silence so powerful. It takes you out of the emotional turbulence of situations and places you firmly in the position of the observer. Observation gives you distance, and distance gives you clarity. When you are too close to a situation, your emotions blur your vision. But the moment you step back and choose silence, the picture becomes sharper. You start understanding what deserves your reaction and what doesn't. You realize that not every comment needs an answer, not every challenge needs a battle, and not every misunderstanding needs clarification. Sometimes the most powerful response is no response at all, because silence says what words cannot, that you are unaffected, that you are grounded, that you are not easily moved. And the truth is, people reveal everything about themselves when you allow them space to speak. If you talk less, you listen more. If you listen more, you understand more. And if you understand more, you make better decisions, not based on emotion, but based on insight. This is how silence protects you. It prevents you from acting impulsively. It saves you from unnecessary conflicts. Shields your energy from being wasted on people who don't deserve access to it. Through silence, you become more selective about where you invest your words, your emotions, and your time. There is also a deeper layer to this kind of silence. It strengthens your emotional discipline. When you don't react, you're proving to yourself that you're in control. You're training your mind to pause before it speaks, to evaluate before it judges, to settle before it moves. This kind of emotional discipline is rare, and it is powerful. It is the reason why a woman who learns silence becomes unpredictable, not in a chaotic sense, but in a grounded one. People can no longer manipulate her reactions because she doesn't offer them easily. She no longer falls into emotional traps, arguments, or drama because she recognizes them before they unfold. Her silence becomes her shield. And something remarkable happens when you embody this silence. Your presence becomes louder. Your energy becomes stronger. People notice that you don't need to speak to be understood. You don't need to explain your worth, defend your boundaries, or justify your decisions. Your energy communicates all of it with clarity, and the world begins to treat you differently, not because you demanded respect, but because you carried yourself in a way that made respect the only option. This is why silence paired with observation becomes transformational. It's not passive, it's not timid, it's intentional. It is a conscious decision to choose understanding over assumption, clarity over chaos, and inner peace over external noise. And when you move with this kind of quiet power, life unfolds more smoothly. Relationships become clearer, challenges become easier to navigate, and your own internal world becomes calmer and more aligned. Emotional discipline is one of the greatest strengths a woman can develop, not because emotions are a weakness, but because emotions are powerful, and anything powerful must be guided, not suppressed. When you learn to direct your emotional energy rather than let it direct you, you unlock a version of yourself that is clearer, calmer, and far more capable of navigating everything life places before you. Emotional discipline is not about being cold or detached, it's about being steady. It's about deciding that your peace is more valuable than proving a point, your stability is more important than winning an argument, and your purpose is stronger than any temporary feeling. Most of the time, we react quickly because we feel deeply, and feeling deeply is a beautiful thing, but reacting quickly is not always wise. When your emotions lead your steps, you rush into decisions that don't represent your values. You give your energy to conflicts that never deserved your voice, and you let temporary storms convince you that the whole world is falling apart. Emotional discipline teaches you to pause. It teaches you to slow down your reactions so you can see clearly. And once you see clearly, you begin to understand that not every feeling is a direction, not every impulse is a truth, and not every situation deserves your full emotional investment. A woman who cultivates emotional discipline becomes far more powerful than someone who is simply loud or reactive. She becomes someone who can walk away without fear, who can stay calm in the middle of chaos, who can choose understanding over assumption, and who can maintain her dignity even when her emotions beg her to do the opposite. This discipline doesn't silence your heart, it strengthens it. It teaches your emotions to work for you, not against you. And what many people underestimate is that emotional discipline is built in the quiet moments. The moments where you could react but choose not to, the moments where you feel anger rising but decide to breathe, the moments where someone tries to provoke you and you realize that responding would only drain your energy. In these small private victories, you train your mind to stay grounded. Little by little, you begin to develop a sense of control over yourself that nothing outside of you can easily disturb. You will notice that when you stop reacting emotionally, people lose the ability to manipulate your feelings. They stop being able to pull you into drama. They can no longer use your empathy against you. They realize that you are not easily moved, not easily shaken. And this doesn't make you hard, it makes you sovereign. It places you in command of your own internal world. And that is where true power exists, not in controlling others, but in controlling yourself. Emotional discipline also helps you recognize the difference between someone who genuinely cares for you and someone who only wants to control you. When you're emotionally reactive, people can push your buttons. When you're emotionally disciplined, those buttons disappear. You learn to see people's intentions clearly because you're no longer blinded by intensity. You become a better judge of character, a wiser decision maker, and a more intuitive observer of your own needs. And something shifts inside you when you stop letting your emotions dominate your choices. You become more patient with yourself, more forgiving of your past, and more confident in your future. You begin to value your emotional energy like a currency, spending it wisely, conserving it when needed, and investing it in people and situations that align with your growth. This shift changes the way you speak, the way you move, the way you set boundaries. It changes how you see yourself. It shows you that strength isn't in reacting, it's in choosing. Over time, this discipline becomes a form of emotional freedom. You're no longer controlled by your triggers or overwhelmed by your thoughts. You begin to express emotions intentionally rather than impulsively. And when you express emotions intentionally, people listen differently. They feel the weight of your calmness, the clarity of your presence. They respect your silence, your patience, your steadiness, because emotional discipline doesn't make you less emotional, it makes you more powerful with your emotions. There comes a moment in every woman's life when she realizes that her worth can no longer be placed in the hands of others. Not because she becomes distant or guarded, but because she finally understands that self-worth is an internal truth, not an external reward. Building an unshakable sense of self-worth is not about convincing the world that you matter. It's about knowing it so deeply within yourself that nothing and no one can take it away. It's about standing in your own identity with a level of confidence that doesn't need to be loud because it is grounded, rooted, and real. When you begin to focus on yourself, when you pull your attention away from the noise and the expectations, something powerful begins to unfold. You stop negotiating with your own value. You stop trying to earn space in places where you don't belong. You stop shrinking yourself just to fit into environments that were never designed for your growth. You start recognizing how often you've accepted less than you deserved simply because you didn't realize how much you were worth. A woman's self-worth becomes unshakable the moment she decides that her time, her energy, her love, her presence are valuable assets, not things to be handed out freely to anyone who asks. She begins to look at herself differently, not with arrogance, but with understanding. She understands her strengths, her flaws, her boundaries, and her standards. She honors them, she protects them, she refuses to betray herself by settling for anything that goes against them. And as this understanding grows, she becomes a woman whose value is not determined by how others treat her, but by how she treats herself. There is a quiet transformation that happens when a woman stops seeking validation. She no longer waits for someone to choose her, to approve of her, or to reassure her. She no longer shapes herself to match anyone else's expectations. She becomes the source of her own confidence. She becomes the foundation of her own stability. And because she is no longer influenced by the shifting opinions around her, she becomes more consistent, more stable, more radiant in her identity. And here's what many people don't realize. Self-worth is not built in a single moment. It is built through small decisions. Every time you say no to something that drains you, you build it. Every time you step away from someone who disrespects you, you build it. Every time you honor your boundaries, even when it feels uncomfortable, you build it. You reinforce your value each time you choose self-respect over fear, clarity over confusion, peace over chaos. These small choices become the foundation of a self-worth that cannot be shaken by rejection, by disappointment, or by uncertainty. When a woman knows her worth, she no longer tolerates behaviors that contradict it. She no longer entertains situations that leave her feeling empty. She no longer gives endless chances to people who only show her patterns. Her standards rise, not because she suddenly becomes demanding, but because she finally understands what alignment feels like. She recognizes that anything that requires her to abandon herself is too expensive, and she refuses to pay that price. A woman with unshakable self-worth also becomes more compassionate with herself. She no longer punishes herself for past mistakes or holds on to guilt that no longer serves her. She recognizes that growth comes with lessons, and lessons come with discomfort. She embraces her past as something that shaped her, not something that defines her. And because she no longer sees herself through the lens of insecurity or comparison, she stops competing with others. She realizes that her journey is unique, her pace is perfect, and her value is inherent. People feel the shift when this level of self-worth emerges. They treat you differently because you treat yourself differently. They respect the boundaries you once hesitated to set. They approach you with more intention because you no longer entertain inconsistency. They sense that your presence is not something to be taken lightly. And without saying a word, your energy communicates the message, I know my worth, and I will not abandon myself for anyone. There is a quiet freedom that enters your life the moment you stop chasing outcomes. So much of a woman's suffering comes from trying to force what isn't ready, hold on to what's falling apart, or control what was never hers to manage. And it's not because she is weak, it's because she cares, she hopes, she wants things to work, she wants people to stay, she wants life to align with the vision she carries in her heart. But life has its own rhythm, and trying to bend that rhythm to match your expectations only exhausts your spirit. Detachment isn't giving up. It's giving space. It's trusting your path enough to stop gripping everything so tightly. When a woman begins to detach, she doesn't become indifferent, she becomes wiser. She stops trying to prove her value to people who cannot see it. She stops trying to convince others to love her the way she deserves. She stops prioritizing the temporary emotions of others over her long-term peace. Instead, she learns to allow people to show who they really are without correcting them, to allow situations to unfold without forcing an outcome, to allow life to bring what is meant for her without chasing what is not. This kind of detachment softens your heart while sharpening your vision. You begin to see the difference between holding on and holding yourself back. You realize that when you chase something with desperation, you push it away. When you cling to something out of fear, you suffocate it. But when you move with quiet confidence, with the awareness that what is meant for you cannot slip away, everything starts to come toward you naturally. Opportunities arrive without being forced. People show up with more effort. Life feels less like a battle and more like a flow. A woman who practices detachment also begins to trust her own timing. She understands that not everything needs to happen right now. She starts honoring the pauses, the transitions, the waiting seasons, because she realizes that waiting is not a sign of delay, it is preparation. It is the space where she grows into the version of herself who is ready for what she once prayed for. When she trusts her path, she no longer feels the need to rush. She no longer compares her pace to anyone else's. She no longer panics when something doesn't work out. Instead, she takes a breath and knows that either it wasn't meant for her or something better is already on the way. Detachment also frees you from people-pleasing. When you stop depending on a specific outcome, you stop trying to mold yourself to fit someone else's expectations. You stop chasing validation, approval, or reassurance. You stop giving weight to opinions that were never meant to guide you. Suddenly, you're living for yourself, not in a selfish way, but in a grounded, conscious way. You begin making decisions that align with your peace instead of your fear. You begin choosing relationships that nourish you instead of drain you. You begin walking away from situations that once kept you stuck, because you finally understand that detachment is not losing, it is choosing yourself. And here is the beautiful truth. When you detach from outcomes, you become more magnetic. People can feel that you are no longer seeking from a place of lack. They feel that you are whole within yourself. They feel that your happiness is not dependent on their presence. And that energy, calm, confident, self-assured, pulls the right people toward you while naturally repelling the ones who were never aligned with you. Detachment does not remove emotion. It removes desperation. It allows you to love without losing yourself, to care without controlling, to give without emptying your soul. It allows you to show up fully and authentically, knowing that you are responsible for your effort, but not the outcome. This is where a woman finds her deepest peace. The peace of knowing that she can let go without fear, trust without anxiety, and move forward without regret. And when a woman reaches that state, life stops feeling like something she must chase and becomes something that rises to meet her. Because the moment she stops forcing things to work, everything that is meant to be begins to fall gently into place. There is a kind of transformation that doesn't need to be announced, shared, or displayed. It happens quietly, in private, far away from the eyes of those who expect you to remain who you used to be. Quiet self-improvement is one of the most powerful forces a woman can embrace, because it allows her to grow without interference, evolve without pressure, and rise without anyone interrupting the process. When you begin improving yourself silently, the world eventually notices, not because you said anything, but because your presence begins to speak with a strength you never had to advertise. Most people look for validation while they're growing. They want applause for their efforts, recognition for their discipline, or reassurance that they're on the right path. But the truth is, the most meaningful changes you will ever make in your life happen when no one is watching. When it's just you, your thoughts, your habits, your discipline. When you wake up early not for praise but for purpose. When you choose peace over drama without anyone knowing the internal battle it took. When you walk away from what no longer aligns with you, even though no one sees the courage behind that choice. That is where real transformation begins. A woman who grows in silence becomes unpredictable in the most empowering way. People expect her to stay the same version they knew, but she's evolving behind the scenes. She's healing privately, learning privately, strengthening privately. And because no one sees the amount of work she's putting into herself, no one knows how high she's about to rise. Quiet growth protects you from opinions, discouragement, and the limitations others try to impose. When people don't know your next move, they can't interfere with it. When they can't see your evolution, they can't sabotage it. Silence shields the seed before it becomes a tree. And the beauty of silent improvement is that it transforms your confidence from the inside out. You stop needing validation because you're validating yourself. You stop needing approval because your actions speak for you. You stop explaining your decisions because your growth makes them obvious. When you build discipline in silence, your habits become stronger, your mind becomes clearer, your focus becomes sharper. You start to move with intention rather than impulse. You start to value your own progress instead of comparing it to someone else's. Quiet growth also teaches you humility, not the kind that makes you shrink, but the kind that makes you grounded. You don't need to prove that you're changing, you simply are. You don't need people to notice your progress, they eventually will. The less you talk about your plans, the more energy you have to execute them. The less you announce your goals, the more committed you become to achieving them. Silence gives you space to make mistakes without judgment, to learn without pressure, and to evolve without explanation. And something wonderful begins to happen when your improvements are made quietly. Your results start speaking louder than anything you could have ever said. People begin to notice the calm in your presence, the wisdom in your silence, the strength in your decisions. They notice the way you carry yourself differently, the way you set boundaries without fear, the way you no longer entertain what you've outgrown. They see a glow that wasn't there before, a confidence that doesn't need to shout, a peace that radiates from within. They don't know the countless small steps, the quiet nights of reflection, the disciplined mornings, or the internal breakthroughs that created this change, but they feel the impact of it. Silent self-improvement also teaches you patience. You begin to understand that growth is not supposed to be seen, it's supposed to be lived. You realize that the journey matters more than the display. You learn to trust your process, even if it's slow, even if it's unseen, even if no one acknowledges it. You start valuing progress that only you can feel, and over time, that internal progress creates external transformation that is impossible to ignore. When you commit to improving quietly, you stop trying to convince the world of your value and start living in a way that reflects it. You stop trying to prove your worth and start embodying it. You stop waiting for others to recognize your growth and start recognizing it within yourself. And that inner recognition becomes your anchor, the steady force that keeps you grounded, focused, and aligned.